Alright, so we wanted to take a moment to show how we wired our new gauge panel, so our new instrument panel. When we took this thing apart, as you can imagine, just like everything else in this bus, there was wires everywhere. Everything was wired just completely different. Everything was wired in its own way because each of the gauges had its own standard that it followed. So each of the gauges, maybe it needed a direct access to light, or maybe it pulled light from the power cable that was powering the gauge. It was all completely different. So what we did was we bought a set of gauges that were all from the same company, all at the same time, and they all look exactly identical. So the advantage that gives you is they generally tend to be able to be put in a harness much nicer. So what we do is each of the gauges, here we have the back of the gauges. So each of the gauges has one of these wires which brings in a positive 12 volts, the negative, which is the ground, and a keyed 12 volts. So in addition to that, they also have this little black wire which does the backlighting. So that does, like, when you turn the lights on, then the lights come on the gauges. And so each wire has those 5 wires. So it's 2 for the backlighting, and then 3 for the main power, and then each one has a set of signal wires. So some of these are 3-wire, some are 2-wire, and some are, this voltage one is a single wire. So the speedometer only has the GPS antenna and both the power ones. So they're back here. So this button is for the multifunction button. This what this wire's for. It was so you could change the odometer and tripometer and all that kind of stuff. And then this is the tach, which also has a button for calibration. So we don't need the button all the time, so we've tied that up. So what we've done is, what we discovered is that on most of these gauges, the ones with 3 wires usually have a plus 5 volts, a ground, and then the signal wire. On these other ones, it's usually the 2-wire ones, it's usually a ground and a signal. And all of this had very good documentation on what was what, and what all the wires were, and what the color codes were, and all that stuff. So we didn't have any issues with that whatsoever. But what we did do is we made a harness. And so we didn't do every wire, we only did signal wires on most of them, but then we tied them into this harness here. And so what that allows you to do is, when you have to work on stuff, you pull, you just have to pull this, and then we have one for the lights, which is this one. And if you are a PC nerd like me, you'll recognize that that's an ATX connector from a computer. So we got an ATX extension cable, and that's what we used for the lights. So all of the backlights are actually on this. This is some kind of transformer, and I was told by the reps that the backlighting actually runs on like high voltage AC. So I took their word for it. I don't know, but anyway, we wanted to show the wiring. So this is what the back of the panel looks like, and then we used these little quick connects. So this lever comes up, and so this is for like 12. This says 12 volt hot, so that's not keyed. There's a ground. Here's 12 volt lights. And then there should be one more, yep, right here, and this is 12 volts on the key. So we use those just in case we have to expand it at some time in the future and we need a wire from one of those. So what that allowed us to do also is clean up the wiring back here. So all this wiring is now just in this one loom. So, or in this one, cable here, and it's keyed. The nice thing about these is you can't put it in the wrong way. Let's see if I can get that to focus, because it has these jaggedy things here, and it will only allow you to put it in that one way. So here's the other side of that ATX connector. It goes to all the warning lights. So it allowed us to clean up the mess that was back here as well. This cable back here is the GPS antenna. So that's got a connection that looks like that. So to hook this whole thing up, we just connect the three things. We connect this guy here, which is the main gauges. This is the main lights, and then the back of the GPS antenna. So that's how that all works. Alright, so these are the Molex connectors we're using. So we just bought them at, I think we bought them at Fry's. We have a Fry's Electronics here. So this is the size. And the way they come is, they come with a male and female end usually of this, and then male and female, these are the little terminals that you crimp them to. And so in order to crimp these on the wire, there's two little pins here. I don't know if you can see that, but there's two little pins, and then what happens is those little pins need to be crimped with like a special set of crimpers. So you push the little connector in through the bottom, and it has these little sort of fish hook kind of pins on it, which lets you push it and it'll kind of click in there. Alright, so this is the end here. We've determined that this is the pin that it goes in, and so all we do is slide it in and we wait for it to click there, just like that. And now it's really hard to pull back out. So there's a special extraction tool, but the more you pull them in and out, the looser they get. So we just want to do it once. So that's what it looks like there. See, there's one that's been filled, and so we'll do that with all the rest of the wire. So we have them all labeled, and so this will end up looking like just one connector that kind of sticks right here, and then the other one will just slide right over the top. And this connects the gauges, and this connects the lights. So in the previous setup, as far as for the air pressure goes, there was a big hose that came up, and it basically fed one of the sensors directly. So it would be what's considered a mechanical gauge. It had the air hose coming right into it. So when we took off the whole dash panel, we actually had to reattach that air sensor, because then all the air would leak out of there. Well, this new one, it's pretty cool. It came with its own little sensor, and so we were able to take off that hose, and now we could put that gauge wherever we could fit an electric wire. And so what we did is we put it down here, and this is where the old hose connected. So as you can see, it's a nice tidy install, and here is the electric signal that gets generated and goes into that gauge. And so this allowed for just a much cleaner install. Before, that gauge, the hose was so thick and heavy, and it needs to be airtight, that it was a real pain to try to position that thing and try to put the panel in where it needs to go. So this was a much better solution, and as far as we can tell, it's just as accurate. It does stay within its allotted ranges. So for our bus, that's between 90 and 120 psi, and the air seems to stay well within those ranges, just like the gauge displayed before. So it seems to be working great. All right, for water temperature, so this is arguably one of the most important sensors, because the three things we were told about these old Detroit engines is don't lug them, which is don't run the RPMs too low. They hate that. Don't run them out of oil, because they leak oil all the time, and don't ever overheat them. So those are the three things. So this covers one of the three things, this water temperature here. So what we did was replace the old sensor with this new one. This is the one that came with our gauge, and what we did is we soldered that in, and we have it all marine. This is all marine shrink tubing, so that we don't, to avoid any oxidation or stuff like that on the wire. And so this one up here goes to ground. What we did to test it out, just to be sure that it was working correctly, because we were a little suspicious of the old one, is we have an infrared temperature gun. And so what we did is take it all the way up to temperature, all the way till it's, you know, it's been running for a while. We ran it we drive this thing twice a week because we have to drive it back and forth to the storage lot. So we took it all the way up to temperature, and then we measure the temperature of this actual brass this brass fitting, and it should approximate the temperature that it's reading inside. And when we did that, it's within 1 degree. So it's pretty accurate, and we're pretty happy with that. And when I turn the lights on, or I turn the headlights on or anything, it doesn't fluctuate the needle at all like it did before. So that solved that issue, and we're confident that this is giving us an accurate reading. All right, next up is the oil pressure gauge. So again, this is a very important one, and we wanted to make sure that it was reading accurately. The old ones seem to be reading pretty well. Our oil pressure goes from about 20 to 50 or 60 when it's revved up and under load, and it will fast idle around 20 or so. So that we've been told that's a pretty good oil pressure for a Detroit. This is a Detroit diesel 8 V71. We replaced the sender because we couldn't get the old one to work, and this is the one we used. So this is a 3-wire sender, as opposed to the old one. We'll put a photo in there. That was a single wire sender. So we did the whole USB thing, got that all rigged up, and we ended up using just the one signal wire like the other one had before to send it all the way to the front. It really didn't give us any problem at all. There's a mechanical gauge there right next to it to double check to make sure our readings are within range, and they read exactly the same. So we're pretty confident that this gauge is working well as well. All right, our next sensor is the tach. And so for the tach, there's multiple ways you can do it. They have a variety of ways to hook them up, but we chose to do it off the generator. And so we chose to do it right off of this one right here. So I don't know if that's going to show up. On the back of the generator, and that does do a pulse. And the math on it's kind of confusing. When I looked it up on the forums, I believe the right ratio was 13.7 to 1, but we didn't need to use that because the tach that we got, you push a button and it will adjust until you can get the right number. So if you push it down, it'll start climbing up. You let go, push it back, it'll start dropping. And then when you're done, you let it time out, and about 2 seconds later, that's where it sits. So we did that with our tach, and it worked out really great. All right, so the next sensor that we had to put in is a temperature sensor for the transmission. And so this had a temperature sensor before, but it never worked. There was 2 oil gauges on the bottom that never worked, and one wasn't even connected to anything. So it probably never worked. It was probably something that they meant to put in. This actually had a connection, but it never worked, and we never got it to work. So we had ordered a new, before we decided to buy all new gauges, we ordered a new sending unit for this, but came with a sending unit. So we obviously used the one that came with it. So it goes right down here. It's at the bottom of the transmission. So I believe that's actually the oil, I believe that's the drain plug. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's the drain plug, but it is threaded, and the sensor fit right in. So we put a large rubber gasket just in case there's any leaking, and there doesn't appear to be any leaking from the sender, although there's plenty of leaking to be had anyway out of this transmission. It leaks in about 3 different places, but not out of the thing that we put in. So anyway, this one also seems to be working great.